Hi, my name is Stephanie Payne, and in this presentation, I'll discuss an analysis of the movie The Neverending Story using Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. So, the narrative paradigm, what is it? Essentially, the narrative paradigm holds that a person will be more persuaded by a good story than they will a sound argument. The narrative paradigm is founded on the concepts of narration, which is any event that we assign meaning to, narrative rationality, or the standard we use to figure out which stories we'll believe and which we'll discount, and the logic of good reasons, which are the values we use to assess a story's fidelity or credibility. The narrative paradigm was created by Walter Fisher, who was born in 1931 in Honolulu, Hawaii, and who just recently passed away in July of 2018. He was the director of communication at the USC Annenberg School of Communication, and he believed that humans are storytellers by nature, and every event that happens is part of a series of narratives that make up our lives. Let's talk about Bastian's conflict. In The Neverending Story, his conflict centers around how he should face his feelings of fear and loss. In the movie, he's presented with two narratives. The first is offered in the form of a father-son talk at the breakfast table. His father tells him matter-of-factly that it's time to get past his mother's death and start facing his fears by pulling his head out of the clouds and keeping both feet firmly planted on the ground. But Bastian soon finds another narrative in the form of an actual book called The Neverending Story. Through reading this book, Bastian is connected with another world, where he shares in the quest of another young boy named Atreyu, who is trying to save the dying world called Fantasia. In the end of the book, they beseech Bastian for help, saying he is the only one who can save them, and he has to choose between keeping his feet on the ground or doing what he dreams. Decisions. Now let's analyze the two narratives Bastian has been presented with. The first, his father's narrative. His father lives his life believing in the rational world paradigm, where decisions are based on good arguments. He explains to Bastian that it's time to move past his mother's death and face his fears using concise words and reasonable logic. He believes that all that's needed to convince Bastian to keep his feet on the ground is a rational and reasonable argument. The second narrative presented to Bastian is in the form of a story. In this story, Bastian connects with Atreyu and shares in his experiences. He finds himself relating to Atreyu because of his own personal experiences with fear and loss. When Bastian is asked to save Fantasia, he has to choose between the two narratives he has seen and decide which path he will follow. He has to assess the coherence and fidelity of each narrative and make that choice. Will he abandon Fantasia in order to keep his feet on the ground, or will he follow his dreams and face his fears by calling out into the storm to save them? Well, that could have gone better. Let's look at a recommendation where the narrative paradigm could have been used to improve an interaction in the film. When Bastian's father tells him it's time to move past his mother's death and keep his feet on the ground, Bastian accepts his father's narrative as truth and agrees without thought or rebuttal. But I think Bastian could have used the narrative paradigm here to respond to his father with a narrative of his own. He could have attempted to explain his feelings about his mother's death, talk about the bullies that torment him daily, or why he didn't want to try out for the swim team. According to Fisher, we're all telling and listening to a narrative, so why not make our narrative an active one instead of a passive one? In the movie The Neverending Story, we see the narrative paradigm played out very clearly. The movie embodies the narrative paradigm at its core and helps us to see that we are all part of our own never-ending stories. In the end, Through his internal logic of good reason, Bastian finds his truth with Fantasia and makes the choice to save the dying world. Now it's up to us to decide what we want our own narrative to say to others and what direction our own narratives will take. We should embrace our own never-ending story, because as Walter Fisher says, if the narrative paradigm celebrates anything, it celebrates human beings, and it does this by reaffirming our nature as storytellers.